The morning sun rose over the sprawling countryside, casting a golden hue across the fields of Jack Rivers' farm. Nestled in the rolling plains of southern Texas, the farm was a picture of tranquility. The soft clucking of hens and the low mooing of cattle echoed in the distance as dew clung to the grass. Jack, dressed in faded denim jeans and a plaid shirt, stepped out of the farmhouse, his boots crunching on the gravel driveway. A steaming cup of coffee in hand, he took a moment to enjoy the serenity of his surroundings. Jack had earned this quiet life. After spending nearly 3 decades in the Delta Forces, leading countless covert operations across the globe, he decided it was time to leave the battlefield behind. The scars on his body and the memories that haunted his dreams were a constant reminder of the life he had chosen to put in the past. Here, on this land, he found a semblance of peace, a chance to heal and start anew. The farm itself was modest but well-maintained. Jack had built most of it with his own hands. The barn, painted a traditional red, stood proudly beside the farmhouse. A small vegetable garden flourished nearby, tended with the precision and discipline he had cultivated during his military career. The property was fenced off with sturdy wooden posts, and an old tractor sat under a makeshift shed, its engine purring to life whenever Jack needed it. His only companion was Max, a German shepherd with a coat as black as midnight and eyes that sparkled with intelligence. Max had been with Jack for years, a loyal partner who seemed to understand him better than most humans ever could. This morning, as Jack walked across the field to check on his cattle, Max trotted beside him, his tail wagging lazily. Life on the farm was routine yet fulfilling. Each day began before dawn, with chores that required Jack's attention. He fed the animals, repaired fences, and ensured the land remained productive. The physical labor was grueling, but it kept his mind sharp and his body strong. To the locals, Jack was just another farmer, a quiet, solitary man who kept to himself. They knew little of his past and even less about the man he once was. Despite his efforts to blend in, remnants of Jack's former life were visible to those who looked closely. Inside the farmhouse, above the fireplace, hung a shadow box containing his medals of valor and the insignia of the Delta Forces. A corner of the living room housed a bookshelf filled with military strategy manuals and biographies of historical leaders. Hidden in the attic under lock and key were his service weapons and a carefully preserved uniform, a silent acknowledgement of the life he had left behind. One late afternoon, as Jack mended a section of broken fence, he noticed something unusual. A black SUV drove past his property, slowing down just enough for the occupants to take a long look at the farm. It wasn't uncommon for travelers to pass through the area, but there was something about this vehicle that set Jack on edge. The windows were tinted, and the driver never waved, a courtesy most locals extended. Jack's instincts, honed over years of combat, flared to life. He stood still, his eyes following the SUV until it disappeared down the dusty road. "Max," he said softly, patting the dog's head. "I've got a feeling we might be getting some unwanted company." That evening, Jack locked up the house earlier than usual. He double-checked the doors and windows, his movements precise and deliberate. As he sat on the porch with Max at his feet, the tranquil sounds of the countryside did little to ease the unease brewing in his mind. Over the next few days, Jack began to notice more signs of trouble. Strange tire tracks appeared near the edges of his property, leading to a back road that connected to the state highway. Once, while working in the fields, he spotted a drone hovering near the barn. It lingered for a few moments before zipping away, its faint hum fading into the distance. Jack knew these were no random occurrences. Someone was watching him, scouting the area, and likely planning something. His mind raced with possibilities. Rustlers? Trespassers? Or something more sinister? Whatever it was, Jack decided he wouldn't be caught unprepared. That night, he went into the attic and retrieved an old duffel bag. Inside were tools of his trade, items he hoped he'd never have to use again. A tactical knife, a GPS device, night vision goggles, and a small arsenal of firearms. As he inspected each piece, memories of his time in the Delta Forces flooded back. The missions, the camaraderie, the sacrifices, they were all etched into his soul. Max watched silently from the corner of the room, as if sensing the shift in Jack's demeanor. "Looks like we might have to wake up the old instincts, buddy," Jack muttered, his voice tinged with both reluctance and resolve. As the days turned into weeks, Jack's preparations intensified. He reinforced the fences, installed motion sensor lights around the property, and set up surveillance cameras. Every evening, he reviewed the footage, looking for any sign of intrusion. Despite the looming threat, Jack maintained his calm exterior. He continued his daily routine, interacting with the few locals he trusted and ensuring that his farm appeared as normal as ever. However, beneath the surface, the warrior in him was reawakening. The farm, once a place of peace, had become a fortress, a battleground in waiting. Jack knew whoever was targeting him would eventually make their move. And when they did, they would discover that this unassuming farmer was far more than he appeared to be. For now, he waited, his sharp mind and unwavering resolve ready for whatever lay ahead. The quiet life he had built might be under threat, but Jack Rivers was no stranger to danger. After all, he hadn't survived decades in the Delta Forces by being unprepared. The moon hung high in the night sky, casting a pale glow over the farm. It was a deceptively calm evening, with the chirping of crickets and the gentle rustle of the wind in the trees. Jack Rivers sat on his porch, his rifle propped against the wall beside him. Max lay at his feet, his ears twitching at every sound. For days, Jack had felt the tension building, the unease gnawing at his gut. He knew tonight was the night. At exactly 2 a.m., the silence was broken by the faint rumble of engines. Jack's sharp eyes caught the movement of headlights bouncing off the trees lining the dirt road that led to his farm. He rose from his chair, his movements deliberate and calculated. "Max," he whispered, gesturing toward the house. The dog immediately darted inside, trained to stay out of harm's way when things got serious. Jack grabbed his rifle and stepped into the shadows of the porch. His heart rate was steady, his breathing calm. Years of training and countless missions had prepared him for moments like this. He wasn't just a farmer tonight. He was once again the Delta Forces commander who had faced death more times than he could count. The SUVs came to a halt just outside the property, their engines idling. Jack counted 6 vehicles, each loaded with men armed to the teeth. The cartel had come prepared, their weapons gleaming under the moonlight. The men spilled out of the vehicles, their faces partially obscured by bandanas. They moved with purpose, their voices low as they issued commands in Spanish. Jack watched from his vantage point, his sharp eyes assessing the situation. The cartel members carried automatic rifles, handguns, and machetes. They thought they were about to overrun an unsuspecting farmer. They had no idea they were walking into a trap. The group split into teams, some heading toward the barn while others approached the house. Jack had anticipated their every move. He had studied the patterns of cartel raids, their strategies, and their weaknesses. Over the past week, he had fortified his property, turning it into a veritable fortress. Hidden tripwires, motion sensors, and makeshift barricades were strategically placed across the land. The first team reached the barn, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. As one of them tried to force open the door, a loud crack echoed through the night. The man stumbled backward, clutching his leg, which had been caught by a concealed bear trap. His scream pierced the night air, causing the others to freeze in their tracks. "What the hell was that?" one of them muttered, his voice laced with panic. Before they could regroup, another trap was triggered, this time releasing a flare that illuminated the area. The men were exposed, their positions clear to Jack. From his vantage point on the porch, he took aim and fired a single shot. The bullet struck the engine block of one of the SUVs, causing a small explosion that sent the men scrambling for cover. The chaos had begun. The second team, approaching the house, was met with a different kind of resistance. As they climbed the porch steps, a floodlight suddenly activated, blinding them. Jack's voice rang out through a hidden speaker system, cold and commanding. "You've got one chance to leave my property alive. Walk away now." The men hesitated, glancing at one another. Their leader, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek, barked an order. "Ignore him. Move in." They kicked open the front door, only to be met with a flashbang grenade that Jack had rigged to the entryway. The deafening bang and blinding light disoriented the intruders, causing them to stumble and curse. Jack took advantage of the moment, slipping through a side window and circling around the house to flank them. The men who had split off toward the fields didn't fare any better. They triggered tripwires that released a barrage of homemade smoke bombs, obscuring their vision. Panic set in as they fired wildly into the darkness, their bullets hitting nothing but air. Jack moved like a shadow, silent and precise. He picked them off one by one, using his knowledge of the terrain to his advantage. A single shot here, a swift takedown there. He was methodical, a predator stalking his prey. The cartel members, realizing they were outmatched, began to retreat. Shouts of "Retirada! Retirada!" echoed through the night as they scrambled back toward their vehicles. But Jack wasn't finished. As they piled into their SUVs, Jack aimed at the tires and engines, disabling several of the vehicles. The remaining men abandoned their rides and took off on foot, disappearing into the darkness. By dawn, the farm was eerily quiet once more. Smoke rose from the smoldering remains of a disabled SUV, and the faint smell of gunpowder lingered in the air. Jack stood in the middle of the field, his rifle slung over his shoulder. His face was stoic, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of emotion. Max trotted up to him, unharmed, his tail wagging. Jack knelt down, scratching the dog behind the ears. "Good boy," he murmured. The farm had survived the raid, but Jack knew this wasn't the end. The cartel wouldn't take this loss lightly. They would regroup, plan, and come back stronger. But Jack wasn't afraid. He had faced worse odds before and emerged victorious. As he surveyed the damage, he made a mental note of what needed to be repaired and reinforced. He wasn't just defending his farm, he was sending a message. Anyone who tried to take what was his would have to pay the price. The Delta Force's commander might have retired, but Jack Rivers was far from finished. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the farm in hues of orange and gold. The calmness of the morning was deceptive, masking the storm that was brewing just beyond the edges of Jack Rivers' property. The raid from the previous night had left the cartel humiliated and furious, and Jack knew that retaliation was inevitable. The question wasn't if they would come back, but when. Jack moved swiftly across his land, inspecting the aftermath of the attack. The barn door was splintered, tire tracks scarred the once pristine dirt driveway, and the air still carried the acrid scent of smoke from the SUVs he had disabled. As he surveyed the damage, Max followed close behind, his ears perked and alert. Jack knelt down, running a hand along Max's back. "We did good, boy," he murmured. "But this isn't over." Later that morning, Jack headed into the small town a few miles away to pick up supplies. He kept a low profile, wearing a worn-out jacket and a baseball cap that shielded most of his face. The local hardware store was quiet, with just a handful of early risers perusing the aisles. Jack loaded up on lumber, nails, chains, and a few bags of quick-dry cement. He also grabbed extra ammunition from the gun shop next door, knowing full well he might need it sooner than later. As he loaded the supplies into his truck, Jack caught sight of a familiar face. Sheriff Tom Hayes, a tall, weathered man with a gruff demeanor, leaned against his patrol car, watching Jack intently. "Morning, Jack," the sheriff drawled, pushing off the car and walking over. "Morning, Tom," Jack replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Word around town is that there was some commotion out at your place last night," Tom said, his sharp eyes studying Jack's face. "Something I should know about?" Jack hesitated, debating how much to reveal. "Just some troublemakers trying to scare me off my land," he finally said. "Nothing I couldn't handle." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Troublemakers? Or something more serious?" Jack sighed. He had always respected Tom, but he wasn't sure how much the sheriff could, or would, do against a cartel. "Let's just say it's not the kind of trouble a few deputies can solve." Tom's expression darkened. "You're dealing with the cartel, aren't you?" Jack didn't respond, but his silence was answer enough. Back at the farm, Jack wasted no time reinforcing his defenses. He repaired the barn door, fortified the windows and doors of his house, and set up additional traps around the property. He also installed a few motion-activated cameras and floodlights, wiring them to a makeshift control center in his living room. Jack's military instincts kicked into high gear as he planned for every possible scenario. He mapped out escape routes, positioned weapons at strategic points, and even dug shallow trenches in the field for cover. Every step was deliberate, every decision rooted in years of experience as a Delta Forces commander. Despite his preparations, Jack knew that his biggest advantage wasn't his traps or his arsenal. It was the element of surprise. The cartel still had no idea who they were dealing with. Meanwhile, news of the botched raid reached the cartel's leader, Miguel El Lobo Rodriguez. In his sprawling villa across the border, El Lobo was a ruthless man with a reputation for swift and brutal retaliation. The news of his men being outsmarted by a lone farmer infuriated him. El Gringo humiliated us, one of his lieutenants muttered, avoiding El Lobo's fiery gaze. He took out half our men and destroyed the vehicles. He's dangerous. El Lobo slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the glassware. Dangerous? He's just a farmer. A nobody. How does a nobody make fools of my men? The lieutenant hesitated before responding. He's no ordinary farmer, Chief. The way he fought, it was like he knew exactly what we would do. He's trained. Military, maybe. El Lobo narrowed his eyes. Then we'll bring more men. Better men. We'll hit him with everything we've got. A few nights later, Jack's preparations were put to the test. Around midnight, the hum of engines broke the stillness of the night once more. This time, there were more vehicles, he counted at least 10, and the men were better equipped, armed with tactical gear and high-powered rifles. From his position on the porch, Jack activated the floodlights, illuminating the field. The cartel members hesitated, momentarily blinded, but quickly regrouped. "You're outnumbered, viejo," one of them shouted, his voice thick with a Spanish accent. "Come out, and maybe we'll let you live." Jack didn't respond. Instead, he pressed a button on his control panel, triggering a series of explosions that sent dirt and debris flying into the air. The men scrambled for cover, shouting in panic. Using the chaos to his advantage, Jack picked off several of them with precise shots from his rifle. He moved from cover to cover, never staying in one place for too long. The cartel members, despite their numbers, were no match for his tactical expertise. As the battle raged on, the cartel's leader, El Lobo, emerged from one of the SUVs, flanked by two heavily armed bodyguards. He barked orders, rallying his men and urging them to push forward. Jack saw him through the scope of his rifle. For a moment, he considered taking the shot, but he held back. He needed to send a message that would end this once and for all. By the time the sun rose, the field was littered with abandoned weapons and vehicles. The surviving cartel members had fled, dragging their wounded with them. El Lobo was gone, his threats ringing hollow in the light of day. Jack stood in the middle of the field, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He was bruised and exhausted, but victorious. He knew this wasn't the end of his fight with the cartel, but it was a victory nonetheless. As he walked back to the house, Max trotted up to him, wagging his tail. Jack knelt down, scratching behind the dog's ears. "We did good, boy," he said softly. "We did real good." The fallout from the battle would ripple through the cartel's ranks, spreading fear and uncertainty. And while Jack knew that his life would never be the same, he was ready for whatever came next. He wasn't just defending his farm, he was defending his home, his life, and his honor. The dust had barely settled from the previous night's firefight, but Jack Rivers knew the war wasn't over. The cartel wouldn't let their humiliation go unanswered. For Jack, this wasn't just about protecting his farm, it was about drawing a line in the sand. He wasn't going to run, and he certainly wasn't going to let them win. In the days following the skirmish, Jack received an anonymous tip through a coded email, a vestige of his Delta Force days. It confirmed what he suspected. The cartel was regrouping and planning an all-out assault. They weren't just coming for Jack. They intended to raze the entire farm, leaving no trace of him or his legacy. This time, Jack didn't just prepare for defense. He planned an offensive. Jack spent hours walking the perimeter of his property, reinforcing traps and adding new layers of protection. He converted old farming equipment into improvised weapons, pitchforks mounted as barricades, hay balers rigged with explosives, and irrigation pipes turned into flamethrowers. The barn became a command center. Maps of the property were pinned to the walls, marked with red circles indicating choke points and ambush sites. Surveillance cameras fed into a monitor, giving Jack a real-time view of the surroundings. Jack also reached out to a few trusted former comrades. Though they couldn't offer direct help due to their own commitments, they provided him with critical intel on cartel operations, tactics, and potential weaknesses. One night, as Jack sharpened his combat knife at the kitchen table, Max sat by his feet, ears twitching at every creak of the house. Jack looked down at his loyal companion. "It's going to get ugly, boy," he said quietly, "but we'll get through this. Together." The cartel didn't waste time. On the third night, the sound of engines filled the air. Jack, watching from the upper window of the house, counted at least 20 vehicles. This wasn't just a retaliation, it was a full-scale assault. Floodlights pierced the darkness as the convoy approached. Armed men spilled out of the trucks, their movements coordinated and disciplined. At the center of the group was El Lobo, the cartel's leader. He barked orders, his voice cutting through the night air like a whip. "Rivers," he shouted, "come out and face me. You can't win this fight. Surrender now, and maybe we'll make it quick." Jack stood in the shadows, his expression unreadable. He activated the first phase of his plan. The cartel soldiers advanced cautiously, their weapons raised. Suddenly, a deafening explosion rocked the field as one of Jack's traps detonated. A plume of fire and dirt erupted, throwing the men into disarray. Chaos followed. Tripwires triggered flashbangs, blinding and deafening the attackers. Smoke grenades obscured their vision, and hidden speakers played distorted sounds of gunfire, creating the illusion of more defenders. From his vantage point, Jack picked off the disoriented soldiers one by one. His shots were precise, each one a calculated move to sow panic and confusion. El Lobo, however, was no fool. He rallied his men, ordering them to fan out and flush Jack from his hiding spots. But Jack was always one step ahead. He moved silently through the darkness, using his intimate knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver the cartel. In one particularly tense moment, Jack found himself cornered in the barn. A group of cartel soldiers burst through the door, their flashlights cutting through the shadows. Jack waited, his breathing steady, until they were within range. Then, with a swift motion, he ignited the modified hay baler, sending a wall of flames roaring toward them. The men screamed as they scrambled to escape, their weapons forgotten. As the battle raged on, Jack knew it was time to face El Lobo. The cartel leader had taken refuge near the main gate, flanked by his two bodyguards. Jack approached silently, using the cover of smoke and shadows. "Lobo," Jack called out, his voice echoing across the field. "You wanted me? Here I am." El Lobo turned, his face twisting into a snarl. "You're a dead man, Rivers," he spat. "You should have stayed retired." The two men circled each other, their eyes locked. El Lobo drew a machete, its blade gleaming in the moonlight. Jack responded by unsheathing his combat knife, its worn handle fitting perfectly in his hand. The fight was brutal. El Lobo swung the machete with deadly precision, but Jack's years of training and experience gave him the edge. He moved with a speed and agility that belied his age, dodging the attacks and countering with swift, devastating strikes. Finally, with a well-timed maneuver, Jack disarmed El Lobo and pinned him to the ground. "This is for every innocent life you've destroyed," Jack said, his voice low and cold. El Lobo struggled, but Jack's grip was unrelenting. "Kill me then," he taunted. "You're just like me." Jack stared at him for a long moment before responding. "No, I'm nothing like you." He delivered a final blow, knocking El Lobo unconscious. As the sun rose, the remaining cartel members had either fled or been captured. The sheriff, having been alerted to the commotion, arrived with reinforcements. They found Jack standing amidst the wreckage, bloodied but unbroken. "You've got a hell of a mess here, Jack," Sheriff Hayes said, surveying the scene. "It's over now," Jack replied. "At least for now." In the following weeks, Jack's story spread across the town and beyond. He became a local legend, the farmer who stood up to a cartel and won. But Jack didn't care about fame or recognition. All he wanted was peace, a chance to live quietly on his farm with Max by his side. As Jack sat on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he reflected on the choices he had made. He knew his fight wasn't just about defending his land. It was about standing up to injustice, no matter the cost. Sometimes, doing the right thing means putting everything on the line, he said to himself. To everyone hearing his story, Jack's message was clear. Courage and resilience can overcome even the darkest of odds. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of bravery and determination.